Yes, thank you for making space for this topic. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time that's something that I haven't seen addressed very often in the community, and I thought it was important.
Welcome to The Full Stop, a podcast presented by Childless Not By Choice hosts for the Childless Not By Choice community, their cheerleaders and allies. The Full Stop podcast is hosted by Michael Hughes, Sarah Lawrence and me, Berenice Howard-Smith. The podcast explores the themes that make up the childless identity, and we hope that with our guests you'll find information, inspiration, and if appropriate, your place in the childless community. On this episode, we're joined by Lori and by Sandra McNicol, founder of Childless Life. This episode began as a conversation in our Full Stop online community. We talked about topics around childlessness that we hadn't talked about before on the podcast. What hadn't we covered? Our members asked about an episode that tackled miscarriage and pregnancy loss and the isolation that may be felt in both childless and in parenting spaces. As many as you know, we place enormous value on sharing as many stories as we can, however painful that might be. This episode talks about pregnancy loss, IVF, induced labour and miscarriage from the very start. If that's not for you, then it's okay to skip to another episode of The Full Stop. We have 70 that you can choose from. If you're here, then I, Berenice, I'm listening with you because I wasn't able to join this recording. The theme was one that I was so keen to champion. I was so disappointed not to be here. My story is one of miscarriages and failed IVF, natural pregnancy and loss. I've recorded this immediately after listening to the unedited version, and it's an emotional and at times painfully raw listen. That's despite the years that may have passed between loss, and in this recording, there's a reminder that grief is never far away. If in listening to this you require further support, we list resources on our website that may help you, including details of counselling services, and our Full Stop online community also discusses the podcast as well, and it's a safe space for anyone who identifies as childless not by choice. Other groups are also available and on our website. May I also draw your attention to the Miscarriage Association's Leave for Every Loss campaign. The Miscarriage Association are based in the UK, and their campaign demands adequate bereavement leave for anyone experiencing a miscarriage or a loss before the 24 weeks. We support this campaign, and you'll find some more details of that in our show notes along with support services. Please also remember that the thoughts expressed by our guests on any of the podcast episodes across the years are their own and not necessarily those that are reflective of The Full Stop.
Yeah, that's cool.
So welcome everybody. Welcome to this episode where we're going to be talking about quite a heavy topic, difficult topic that some people may find difficult. So if you've skipped over the introduction for this one, you might, we do our introductions, you might think, right, I'm going to skip that. This is just to give you a trigger warning that we're going to be talking about miscarriage, pregnancy loss, and childlessness and the sense of isolation afterwards. So if that's not your bag, if that's going to be too tricky, then feel free to stop now. But I didn't want anybody blundering in, because sometimes you will, I skip introduction, think, yeah, I've heard that, but we just want to keep everybody safe. So we've been joined by a couple of fantastic guests. I've got to admit, I've been so excited to have you both on. We are joined by Lori, and we're joined by Sandra McNicol, who I know as well in the counselling world. So we are, if you're okay to, if we could start with you doing introductions, if we could ask for a little bit about you, would that be okay? Just to introduce you to our listeners.
Lori, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Lori, and I'm 64 years old. I'm retired. I worked as a corporate communicator for 28 years before that. I live just north of Toronto, and my story is a little bit backward for some people. A lot of people will go through infertility treatment, have pregnancy losses, decide they've had enough and stay childless. I got pregnant first, had one pregnancy, which ended at 6 months, and then did some infertility treatments, and eventually threw in the towel and have been childless since then. My loss was in 1998, so that's coming up to 27 years ago. And we stopped fertility treatments in 2001. So that's almost 25 years ago. So that's a nutshell.
Thank you, Lori.
So I have something in common with Lori already. I also have a backward story, so I'll come to that in a second, but just to connect on that. So my name's Sandra McNicol. I'm the founder of Childless.life. I'm a life coach and a grief therapist, and I've been supporting the childless community for 5 years now. This was kind of something that was born out of a personal need, like many of us in the community that do work in this area, for coming out of that isolation, I guess, would be the summary here. But just want to pause for a second and say a huge thank you. I'm sitting here finally with my cup of tea, and I've had a cup of tea with you guys for so many years and so many times, but you just didn't know I was there, sort of type thing. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be with you here, and thank you for inviting me on to be a guest. So in the nutshell of my story, basically I was one of these people that always thought that I would become a mother. Kind of one of my first memories is kind of boldly saying to my friends, I'm not going to be a young mum. I'm going to wait till I'm 25. When you were little, 25 was like the oldest age in the world, wasn't it? So, and I'm going to have 2 kids. So, they're from like 4 years old, I think, 4 or 5 years old, I think that memory would be. I was always thought that I'd be a mother. But I was brought up in this generation that we probably thought we could have it all in some ways, So, I was in a relationship from 16 to 29, and it just didn't feel right to bring children into that. I didn't feel ready, and, focused on travel and building my career and all those type of things. When that ended, I didn't realise that between 29 and 39 I would be largely single. So, I had relationships, but not really anything significant, let's say. But yeah, basically, largely I was single then. So at 36, well, it is backwards and not backwards, Lori. At 36, I decided to freeze my eggs, because I hadn't found my life partner and hadn't found someone who, basically to go on this journey. And for me, it was important to have, coming from divorced parents, it was important to have the figure of a mother and a father for my future child. So I froze my eggs at 36, and then at 39 I got lucky and found my husband, and at 42 we became naturally pregnant, and at 11 weeks we had our first loss, which for me was kind of like a loss of innocence in some way. I just didn't expect that to happen. We don't become educated in this until you've gone through the experience. So all of that stuff about 1 in 4, there's so much silence around it, this topic, that you look more inwards, and, there's a lot of blame and shame and things on yourself, or in my personal case anyway. So I had my first loss at 42, 6 months later, the second loss. I kind of needed a year to kind of digest that. I wouldn't say recover, because I don't think you ever recover in a way. And then we pulled out the frozen eggs, and we obviously, I wouldn't be here today if that was successful. So that was back in 2019 that my journey came to an end. There's one other kind of element of the nutshell journey that then probably is worth mentioning as well. Because of the pain that we went through with those losses, there's always this, hey, we've stopped fertility treatments, we've looked at the pros and cons of all of the other options, and we decided our journey stops here. But there's still that, well, let's see if something naturally happens sort of type thing. It's saying, yeah, you've closed the door, but we don't know sort of type thing. But my husband, out of a very caring place, 18 months into that, said, no, I can't go back there again. I can't risk. You're now 44. I can't risk another loss. This was so painful, and looking back on it for us. And he decided to go and have a vasectomy. And that was another kind of dip down in my journey at that moment in time. I thought the door was closed. And until the door is really closed, probably most women have this with the menopause and realise, hey, it really, really is closed. For me, it was with my husband's vasectomy. But by that time, I'd found a community, and it was much easier to get support and such likes. But that wasn't much of a nutshell. So I'll stop there and let you ask more questions. And yeah, thank you.
It's interesting, isn't it? I'm really, I'm kind of affected by this issue as well. I had a loss. I think you're so right, Sandra. It hits you. I was brought up in that generation as well. I don't know about you, but I found sex education at school to be sadly lacking, but I didn't know that until I was 38 and I had my loss. You know, I was brought up with the messaging that you only had to look at a boy and that was boom, you were pregnant. That was it. So I was incredibly careful, I think, because I wanted my ducks in a row, pretty much, I guess, like you, Sandra. I wanted the house, I wanted this blah 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 blah, you know, the security. But I think it's that, for me, that loss of innocence. Once I had my loss, 8 weeks, that completely, I couldn't really get my head around it, and I couldn't really try after that. For me, that loss of that innocence and that feeling that it would work just evaporated with that loss. And it took me so much to get back into that headspace. But in the meantime, I'd had lots of other stuff happen, and, you know, there's the diagnosis of endo for a start. But that loss of innocence, do you both chime with that? I mean, Michael, you might want to come in on this as well. There is something around that, isn't there, in terms of that sense of isolation after you have a loss?
Are you waiting for me to say something? Yeah, so I'm just listening to you three and thinking about our loss. It was the last round of IVF that we ever did, and yeah, it came back. It worked, and we had been through so many disappointments, and it was such a strange time, because there was such elation that it worked. Elation that I'd never experienced before. Whenever I think about this, I think about sitting in the room just on the other side of this wall here, where we used to have the home office, and that's where we had the computer set up. And it was a lovely warm spring day. The window was open, and the breeze was coming through. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to be a dad. And there's a specific song that was playing at that specific time that I haven't listened. I can't bring myself to listen to, because of the pain that once we found that there was a miscarriage, the pain and the despair that caused was so immense. And yeah, look, another thing that came to mind while I was listening to you both is I went to work, and one of the supervisors there, I'd able to say that we'd had a miscarriage, and he goes, "Mate, all I've got to do is put my jeans over the end of the bed and she's pregnant." And it was like, you. And it's a really good indicator, specifically in the world of men, how it has, unless a man has experienced a miscarriage in a relationship, then they've got no idea. And you do feel very alone, because who do you talk to? There's a bloke. Who do I go and talk to? Vicky's devastated. I can't burden her. Where do I go? So yeah, sorry if I took that out off on a tangent, but yeah, it is really, really isolating.
I don't think it was a tangent at all, Michael. And for me, the way you explained that, I got a full shiver through my body as well, because it's like you've gone from 100% happiness in a way. I felt like, wow, like 42, pregnant naturally, like this is a dream come true. And we didn't keep it a secret, but we didn't share it widely neither. But we thought, okay, we share with the people that, closest to us and sort of thing. But the plans, we were like 20 years in the future almost with the plans, what schools, what values, what educations. There was just so much excitement around that. And boom, it goes, overnight, or all of those dreams are gone. So it is a very shattering experience as well, to go from 100% happiness to zero back in a matter of hours. So I really heard you on that.
I was just going to say, sorry, Laura, I was just going to say, Sandra, I can And I can really understand your husband as well, because Vicky would have kept going. She would have said, I'll go again. I said, I can't, I really can't. It was, I really understand him in that respect too. Sorry, Laurie, I cut you off.
I was just going to say that, listening to the three of you, I'm just going, yes, yes, yes. I can relate to so many things that all of you have been saying. And just as far as the male piece goes, my husband was also the one who finally, I probably could have gone further, just because we actually stopped fertility treatments after 3 IUIs with injectable drugs, which is, we sort of agonized over, okay, how far do we want to push this? We went to see a counselor, and that was what we had agreed to. And in the back of my head, I was always going like, well, but we could always go a little bit further. And part of me thought that, maybe we should try IVF just because it's there. We should try it. But he was just like, no. He said, I can't do this. And he said, this is not worth, because he could see I was a wreck. I was having panic attacks. I thought I was having a heart attack one time. He was just like, no, this is not worth it. This is not worth what you're doing to yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, definitely. Yeah. So that was that. It's funny though, because, there was that elation at the beginning. I mean, that was something when you see those 2 lines popping up when it's always been, nothing before, that was something. But it very quickly, my loss was at 26 weeks. So I was, more than 6 months pregnant. But from almost right from the very beginning, it was a very uncertain pregnancy. There was a lot of ups and downs. I won't go into all the details, but it was a real roller coaster ride. There were moments of joy. I got to do some of the fun things that people get to do when they're pregnant, like going shopping for maternity clothes. My mother came to visit me right after we found out. I knew that I couldn't keep it a secret, so I did tell her, and then the whole world knew eventually. But, so I got to take her, we got to go maternity clothes shopping together, that kind of thing. But there was always just this nagging thing in the background. I spotted all through my first trimester. People kept telling me it was okay. Oh, I spotted all the time through my first trimester. And then there was an ultrasound and things weren't quite right. And then there was a blood test where things weren't quite right. And it just went on and on and on until all of a sudden it just came to a screeching halt. So sometimes I have to admit that sometimes I feel that some childless women envy me because I was pregnant, because they never had the opportunity to be pregnant, never were able to get pregnant. But I would not wish that experience of pregnancy on anyone, for all the joy that it did bring me, those few moments that I would not trade. But at the same time, it just, you would not wish that on anybody. It was really, it was tough. It was very tough.
Thank you for sharing, Lori. I think that's really hard. I'm glad you talked about that, actually. It's something that's been on my mind. It's about the hierarchy of grief, in the sense that if you've been pregnant, or then your grief is worth perhaps more, or is seen as more. But I think it's having worked with people that haven't had the opportunity, I think there's just as much grief in that. So if anybody's listening and they're going, oh well, that's all well and good, but actually that is the case. I know from my own point of view, when I had my miscarriage, I was actually suicidal. I was absolutely beside myself. It took me so long to get pregnant that I'd never actually felt that elation. I just felt terror, abject terror. Oh my God, this has taken so long. What if I lose it? And then, of course, I did. And it became almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I was hyper vigilant of my body. Any twinge, any sort of, what was that? It was, unfortunately, I lost the baby at 8 weeks, but it was 8 weeks of hell. There was no joy in it for me at all. I actually kept it secret for a little while from my partner, because I was like, I should be happy, but I'm not happy. Why am I not happy? And I was terrified of all of it. But I do think that, sometimes people look at it and go, it must be such a happy thing. But for me, it really wasn't. So, yeah, I just want to share that, because for some, I think that might be a bit of a.
But to a certain extent, that isolation as well, Because we all have different experiences and because we know what it feels like to be alone, this is the first time in 5 years of working in this community that I'm actually having this conversation, because I want to make sure everybody feels included, because everybody's journey is valid, whether there was a pregnancy in that or not, whether there was a partner in that or not, whether there was an attempt, I don't know, everybody's journey is valid, yet it's important to make space for this journey as well, so, we all have a voice and we all have our experiences. Lead up to my loss was very different from Lori's. So I really did feel completely innocent in all of this thing, and I thought it was impossible to have a loss. My gran had my mum when she was 40, so, my brothers just need to look at a girl like Michael had said earlier, and she was pregnant, whatever. So my family just had this whole big fertility success story in some way. So I bought into that, and, and nobody speaks around this topic. So we can kind of digest that in a second, because it's not all about this as I discovered later. But yeah, basically, I remember like the gynecologist being a bit careful, saying, okay, you're 42, you need to take it easy. I'd just done a triathlon before I got pregnant, was then. So I was like, okay, we're going for labour now. This is like a marathon. I should go into training for this. And she's like, calm down. But, I was thinking, yeah, okay, wait a minute, how do you prepare for this next goal sort of type thing? And as I say, our minds emotionally, we were planning out schools, we were planning out values, how we wanted to bring up this child, all of that stuff. So at 10 weeks, I listened to the doctor, I listened to my husband, and I calmed down, I put the bike away, all of that type of stuff, and I slowed down. So I got the message, but I was like, God, they're like wrapping me up in cotton wool a bit, was the way I felt, because I didn't think that it was a possibility. So yeah, we were having regular appointments, being a geriatric pregnancy or whatever these horrible terms that we can get onto in a second as well. And I had a scan at 10 weeks. We saw the baby's heartbeat, the measurements were all correct, all of that type of stuff. And the doctor, I can't remember the exact words, but more or less she said, this is on its way. This is looking really good. There was kind of like I think the very next day I started to bleed. However, I was at home, it was a Friday if I remember right, my husband had gone out with his parents, and I was like, okay, what do I do? It's like trying to figure out what do I do sort of type thing, and I was advised, I phoned some different places and they said, go to the local hospital and just get it checked out. And they did an scan, heartbeat was still there, everything was fine, and they basically said, hey, everything looks okay, take a couple of days, rest well, whatever, but this isn't in your control. If this, there's nothing we can do to either save the child or anything. So, basically just go home and rest and keep your fingers crossed. And it seemed to work. I stopped bleeding, everything looked normal, everything kind of went back. And it was 1 week later when I actually had the loss, was then but having that message saying, there's no point even running here if something happens, because there's absolutely nothing we can do. And this might be a different experience for Lori as well, because she was much, much further down her journey. I'm at 11 weeks. But basically that Saturday night, when I had my loss, I was alone in a bathroom floor. Then, so my husband, when you go through giving birth, you're in a hospital, you're surrounded by a friend, a husband, whatever. My husband was there, but was like, oh God, what the hell do I do here? Sort of thing. I was like, nah, just leave me to it. It's fine. It's then, so, but that, you're physically isolated when you go through that. I don't know what everybody else's experiences were, but this was my personal experience, and yeah. So, we went to the hospital the next day to get it confirmed, but it's kind of obvious, I'm not going to go into the graphic details, but you are giving birth to a child, but, this child is not going to survive, and there's the same mess, let's just say. But physically, you're alone there, or I was alone, and, we just went to the hospital the next day to have it confirmed and make sure that everything was. And then, the process continued for about another 10 days as far as I remember. So that isolation starts from a very physical place as well, or started for me from physically I was alone during that process. And I say, Lori, it's 6 months. I imagine this is not your story, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit different. In my case, again, it was, the roller coaster ride. We had a blood screen test come back suspicious for trisomy, which basically something very genetically wrong. So I had to have amniocentesis. My own gynecologist was on vacation at the time, so I was in the care of the genetic counselor, who was actually quite wonderful. But it took 3 weeks for them to bring back the results, which is just, I mean, it was longer than that it should have been, and it's an eternity when you're waiting to hear something like that. I guess they had trouble cultivating the sample they took. 3 weeks, and it came back, and they said, no, the genetics are fine. It's normal. And I was just like, okay, we're doing this, and there was that high of the roller coaster. I thought, okay, well, she's going to be very small, because we knew by then that we knew that it was a girl after the amnio, but maybe she'll be born early. Maybe she'll spend some time in the NICU, but that's what they're there for. And we were at an excellent hospital in downtown Toronto. You get the best care there. They can work miracles. Well, they can't. They can't always do it. I went for my 6-month checkup. It was at 26 weeks. My OBGYN was back from vacation. And I said to him, that was the worst time. And, and he just we're joking around. And then he went to listen for the heartbeat, and there was no heartbeat. He could not find a heartbeat. And he just, he took off his stethoscope, and he says, well, I can send you for an ultrasound now, or I was scheduled to go for another one to check in later that afternoon. He says, I can send you right now. He says, but you have to be prepared for what they might tell you. And nobody is ever prepared for that. Nobody is ever prepared. I had to call my husband. I said, they can't find a heartbeat. He says, I can't get away right now. And so I went for the ultrasound by myself. The poor ultrasound technician, I don't think she knew what to say. I got back to my doctor's office, I stopped at a payphone on a different floor, called my husband. He said, I'll be right there, and went up to my doctor's office. Very fortunately, it was late. It was mid-afternoon by that time. And normally the halls would be lined with pregnant women waiting for their appointment. And there was nobody there by then. Everybody had gone. And the nurse was waiting outside in the hall for me. And she just gave me this huge hug. And and my husband eventually came. I was booked to be induced 2 days later at the hospital. In between that time, I went into labor. And, but I called up my doctor, and he just told us to come on down. We went, and I was basically there at the appointed time. So they didn't need to induce, which was a relief, because I felt like I would be doing something to end this pregnancy, even though I knew the baby was gone. And they gave me all kinds of drugs. I didn't feel that much pain, but it was, And my mother, I was grateful. Like, people were saying, well, why didn't you go right? Why didn't they put you in right away in the hospital? But I was grateful for that, because it gave my mother time to arrange to fly to Toronto and come. And she came straight from the airport to the hospital and was there with me as well as my husband. So, yeah.
If the topic in this episode chimes with you, you can get in touch with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. We appreciate your feedback. Childless Not By Choice listeners can carry on the conversation with us in our safe space at the Full Stop online community. For more details on how to join and to claim a free month's trial on us, please visit www.thefullstoppod.com. We extend a huge thanks to the current members of our amazing online community, and it's because of them that we can keep the lights on for the podcast and look forward to giving back to the childless community as we grow.
Lori, can I take you back a touch to what you said earlier? Berenice sent us some words, and when you said about the isolation, she said, I've sat in the hinterland with Lori and really felt empathy with her. I can remember being immediately given a value in the measure of my experience, that by being able to conceive for any length of time made me an almost mother and an almost non-mother, but never entirely childless because there had been a child. briefly, yet I am still childless. My worth in a pronatal world never increased in my mind, even if for some it had, without me knowing it. None of the miscarriage advice felt useful because IVF wasn't considered in the support and didn't recognise that my chances of being pregnant in the first place were remote. There wasn't any space for me to land, and I still sometimes felt the echoes of, at least you could conceive. Putting a value on how we arrive in this place of childlessness may silo people who need help, or devalue us further, or force the sharing of stories in order to justify why we are here, when every reason is equally important as the next, as Sandra said earlier. And she has two questions for us around this. What would equality in childlessness look like? Are there better words or language to make everyone feel welcome? How can we unite to support our friends around the world who may find themselves segregated by childlessness? Because I did see another comment from someone once that said that are we actually inclusive? And as you said earlier, Sarah, there is sometimes a competition as such. I know that was a big mouthful.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts around some of those things. First of all, around hierarchies and competition that exists in the pregnancy loss community as well. One thing that I neglected to mention in my introduction is that after our loss, my husband and I attended a local pregnancy loss support group for a year. We found it very, very so helpful. I found some support online as well. And that was sort of my daily lifeline. But to actually sit in a room with other people who had been through the same or a very similar thing at approximately the same time frame as we had, there was just nothing like that. Just to be able to sit and talk with other people, especially when so many people didn't want to hear what we had to say. So, and then after that, we trained and we became support group facilitators, and we stayed there. We were there for 10 years. So we, heard stories, and every meeting we would tell our stories. Or some version of it, the Reader's Digest condensed version, especially once we all got to know each other better. So, although I haven't told my story in quite a while, that was 10, 15 years ago we left. So it's been a while. But yes, so we heard, stories from dozens and dozens of couples, and everybody's loss was different. And yet there was so much that we had in common. We had people who had miscarriage. We had people who had lost infants that they actually brought home, from crib death or SIDS, or sometimes, they knew that there was something wrong, but they'd had the baby in the NICU, they brought them home and they died. And it was funny because even when there was so much that could unite us, we found that, there were levels of envy between people who had miscarriage felt envious because some of us got to see and hold our babies in the hospital. Some of us had pictures. I was envious of people whose pictures were better than mine because all I have are a couple of lousy Polaroids that the nurses took for us. So much depended on what stage of the loss that you lost your baby at, what kind of training the staff there had to support you. So yeah, everybody's experience was different, but at the same time, we all had loss and we were all missing something in our lives. So that was one thing. The thing about being childless and having a pregnancy loss, I've heard somebody within the community once said, it's like having a foot in both camps, because on one hand, we have these children or potential children out there, and some of us identify very strongly as mothers. Some of us do not. When your loss is at 8 weeks or 11 weeks or whatever, sometimes it's a little more intangible and it's harder to feel that identification with the mother role. Than if you had a baby in the NICU and you held that child and you did the skin to skin care and other things. But on the other hand, we are childless because we had those children, but we don't have them. We did not have the experience of parenting that child. The experience stopped. So you have some attachment, you have some memories of that pregnancy, but we don't have any of the other experiences that parents would have, and the milestones that they get to experience. And I have pregnancy stories. I have a birth story. I have a labor and delivery story. Nobody wants to hear my story. Mothers do not want to hear my story. Women who are trying to get pregnant do not want to hear my story. Childless women don't really want to hear my story either. It's something nobody wants to hear about, because it is a very painful reminder to people that not everybody gets pregnant. Not everybody who gets pregnant gets to take home a baby. And as common as pregnancy loss is in our culture, in our society, nobody talks about it. It's gotten a little bit better in recent years, but there's still an awful lot of silence and stigma around that in so many quarters. So, we're silenced in the parenting community because they don't want to hear about it and they don't know how to talk to us about it. But we also get silenced in the childless community sometimes. And partly we impose that silence on ourselves because we are sensitive to the fact that not everybody had this experience, that some people maybe even envy us a little bit because we have that experience and those memories. And so we tiptoe around the subject because it's very awkward. I know I find myself, it's part of my story and it's part of why I'm childless, but at the same time, I don't like to, go, if I do bring up the fact that I had a loss, I don't want to go into too much detail, saying things that people don't necessarily want to hear.
I resonate a lot with what you're saying there, Lori. I probably would never, until this conversation, I probably have to digest it some more. That word that you just said about, it's not, there's inequality in, or when you said, is then the inequality that we have in this. But yet, I've silenced myself in this out of protection for others as well. I don't speak about this. This is the first conversation that I've had. And how does that silence impact our healing in a way? Because we all say no, and I think this is why this podcast is really, really important, is that by sharing our stories is a real important part of the healing process. And, I would say my childless identity, which I identify with, so despite having two losses, I identify with that. As a side note, I remember hearing a podcast at some stage of someone who did have a loss speaking around being a mother without children, and I was like, whoa, that's an interesting concept as well, and that really sat with me, and yeah, at some stage as well. But I was going to say something else and I've forgotten now. But yeah, this is the first conversation and I've kind of silenced myself around it. And the healing, that was the piece I was going to refer to, something last summer that actually, so going through menopause and such likes, and basically last summer I actually had a kind of emergency doctor appointment to try and sort out stuff with that. And here in Spain, the 15th of August, Spain shuts down pretty much, it's holiday season and whatever, but the 15th of August is a public holiday, and Friday the 6th happened to be when I had this appointment. And I didn't realise it was like an emergency day at the hospital. So I went along for this appointment and suddenly I realised, oh shit, people are having losses around me. And it really brought back the experience for me that then, I haven't talked about this, and it's probably the part of my childhood experience that is least healed still. Because I was like, wow, okay, this is, the healing for my pregnant self, and that whole experience of that younger version of me who was there in the bathroom floor and such like. I haven't really given her the love and attention that she needed because I haven't shared this story until today in some ways as well. So, thank you so much for making this space available to us. And luckily, as I say, these days I have other people that, I could come out of that hospital experience and chat it over with people, and I have more resources and things. But to myself as well, I think it's important for any of our experiences, but I think it's normal that, that I feel uncomfortable around pregnant people and such likes as well. We're always healing, and there's all these different layers, and I don't know.
Yeah. I know I find that, I know lots of us childless women have difficulty being around pregnant women, just because it's a reminder of what we don't have. But for me, there is that extra level that when I know that somebody is pregnant, and especially if it's somebody who is close to me, I am terrified for them. I do not, I cannot, be truly happy for them until that baby is born and we know that everything's okay. In fact, I had somebody very close to me, or fairly close to me, had a baby a few years back, and the timelines were almost in lockstep with my own pregnancy. She was going for an ultrasound on August the 7th, which was the date, or August the 5th, which was the date that I went for my 6 months ultrasound. And her due date was, my original due date was November the 14th, and the baby was born on November the 17th. So yeah, that was very tough. I mean, I was happy for her. I was happy for me because I've gotten to be a part of this child's life. But at the same time, it was just, I was holding my breath the whole way through.
I wanted to just thank you both then for being honest about your stories. I'm really with that silence. I really chime with it. It's kind of, I find it very awkward to talk about it actually with the childless community because I don't want to hurt anybody. But by doing that, I'm not really being completely honest about my story. I think I actually really chime with what you're saying there, Lori. When I get pregnancy announcements, I feel sad for myself. But I when people are like that naive joy, I'm like, oh. I find it really difficult to see that, not having had it myself. But also, it's like I really genuinely hope you don't have to come a cropper like some of us had to. But I think it's really, that silence is so telling, isn't it? I know that when we put this episode together, I was sitting there going, I felt nervous about it because I'm like, oh shit, am I going to talk about this really? How deep do I go? And I'm very aware that I've told my story, but not all of it. It's a really difficult one. I'm really with I don't know if listeners went to Chester, but Stella Duffy did a talk, and there was a portion in that talk that absolutely floored me, and it was
me
about,
too.
But it's about how it's scientific, but it's about how the cells of the child stay in your body, and how you continue to be a mum. And I was just like, I felt the whole room go. Oh,
I don't know. Like the way Stella actually said it, I kind of taken note of this as well, because all last summer I had the Stella thing, I had this visit to the hospital, and I was like, whoa, this is really, the healing of this piece is calling for attention in some way. But Stella said something which I reframed afterwards, but at that moment in time, equally like Sarah, I was floored. She said her body became a graveyard for her dead children. Those were the words. And it was like, there was like half of us in the room who'd obviously been through the experience of having a loss, collapsed at that moment in time and collapsed onto each other, which was beautiful that we could collapse onto each other. But for me, I kind of repositioned that as well on that, kind of thinking, well, those cells live on in me. That means my children are living on in me. And perhaps, again, that doesn't sit well with people who haven't had losses and such likes, but we're allowed to reframe things to make it feel better for ourselves. And I was like, no, I don't want my body to be a graveyard. It doesn't sit with me. I don't know. So yeah, that my children live on in me, and don't know. That felt more comfortable to me reframing it somehow. I don't know. It's fine.
It's so interesting because I couldn't remember the terminology. You could see I was talking around the edges going. No.
I wasn't sure if you were deliberately, because it was so flowing, trying to protect our listeners. And I was like, okay. Well.
When you felt it go up, and then it went. I think that's kind of that sitting with that silence, isn't it? It's the realisation of the enormity, I guess, of what we've been through individually, but what we've been through collectively as a subgroup. And I guess that silence is really, really difficult to navigate because you don't want to hurt people, But
exactly.
it needs a voice, doesn't it? It needs to be talked about.
One thing that I think a lot of people, I mean, people just generally, not just people within our community, I don't think people realize is that this loss continues through your life. If you had a pregnancy and you had a due date, you remember that due date. You know how old that child would be. In my case, I had some friends and relatives who were all having babies more or less the same time frames that year. So I've watched those children grow up. I knew what grade they'd be in at school, what they'd be studying, the different milestones that they were reaching. So it wasn't too hard to project that and to, know with some certainty what my child would have been doing. Once she got past the age like high school graduation, that started to get a little more fuzzy. Of course, my husband thinks she would have been a genius and had a PhD by the time she was 16. I was like, okay, well, she might have gone to university. She might have gone to graduate school. At this point, she would be 26 years old. Who knows what she would have been doing? So, and I have other childless after lost friends who, same thing, their children, as their children get older and older, they find it harder. And in some ways, they feel that slipping away a little bit because they don't know just what that child would be doing. But, you live with this. We have a relative whose son was born in April 1998, and my daughter would have been due in November. So he will be turning 27. He will be getting married this summer. That's going to be the first wedding of a peer child that we will be going to. And I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that, but we'll see. We'll see.
It's interesting speaking around the anniversary. For me, I remember exactly what happened that Saturday because it was my mother-in-law's birthday and we'd gone out for lunch and such like, because afterwards there was all that, was it something I ate? Was there cream in it? I don't know, all of those what ifs kind of came in. So I had a very fixed date that then I couldn't forget, but it was her birthday and she's such a loving, caring soul that then, I didn't want to have a shadow on her birthday because of this anniversary sort of thing. I tried to ignore it and that didn't work. But for 4 years I tried, really tried. But, I would end up like, my go-to emotion is more anger than it is sadness. I feel easier to connect with that and I would end up, blurting something out about something in some ways. But that's then where I want to kind of give credit to the community in a way, because they did help me kind of celebrate that anniversary. So, and not celebrate, acknowledge, whatever. I don't know if celebrate's the right word, but acknowledge that anniversary. That in between, my retraining as a grief therapist and things really, allowed me to honour and give space for that. And that felt like quite important in part of my healing process. So, I don't know. So there are some aspects where the community definitely has helped me as well. And those mixture of ladies are people who have had medical abortions or abortions because, they were in a wrong relationship, an unsuitable relationship and things like that, more than miscarriages. But I don't know if that's just coincidence in my particular thing.
Yeah, I've definitely, my loss happened I think it was 2 years after I got my first computer and went online. But so it was still very primitive, I guess, compared to what is out there today. But I did find an email group for just, it was pregnancy after loss. It was people who were either pregnant or hoping to be pregnant after a loss. So I found that. And of course, after a while, everybody's moving on to pregnancy and I was still stuck there. So eventually I drifted away from that. And once I realized I was childless, I found I did, even though this was 2001, there wasn't a lot out there, but there were some communities for childless people. And they were a huge help to me. I'm still in touch with some of the women that I met on my very first Childless board. You all know who you are, so hi out there, if you're listening. And then in 2007, I started blogging and found a blogging community based on people loss adoption, infertility. And there were very few childless women out there who were blogging, and I'm still in touch with some of them as well. And I'm still blogging, by the way. And my blog is called The Road Less Traveled, which I took my cue from the Robert Frost poem, and I thought that was kind of an appropriate name for being childless after infertility and loss, because it's a road that not so many of us will travel down. And my other title that I was thinking of was Childless Mother. I'm glad I took The Road Less Traveled. I think it's a little more poetic, but Childless Mother would have been a good description as well.
Michael, you've been very quiet. I'm curious as to how you're doing with all of this.
Yeah, I was just thinking about anniversaries. Vicky found out she was pregnant on her birthday. We had a miscarriage on Father's Day. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to reconcile if the community has helped us in any way in that respect, because obviously they're quite significant days anyway, and they're just playing around in my head at the moment. I'm not quite sure if I've got answers for that, but that's what's going around in my mind. But I'm having difficulty having words because how do I say this? Because the experience was, is so intrinsic to you three. I sometimes feel I shouldn't be here. I know that's weird, but I know you're three very smart people. You'll understand where that comes from. Yeah. It's just making me think a lot. It's just making me replay. It's making me replay the song in my head that I can't listen to. When you started, Lori, talking about, where your daughter would have been, we do the same. We'd be coming up for a 20-year birthday right now. But I don't want that to sound too glum, because we can actually talk about that. Because one of the things we talk about, the fact that we're sure our kids will be a couple of chunkers. Because, neither Vicky and I are narrow, but we're not narrow people. So, and we've got to a point now where we can talk like that. We can talk about what would have been, what could have been. And in some ways that makes us feel better. Yes. And in some ways it upsets us. So it's almost like the ghost continues to be with us, if that makes sense.
I see it differently in a way. I don't know. Like anytime I go into nature and I see kind of two butterflies playing with each other, I'm like, oh, there's their spirits. They've come along to kind of say hello or whatever. So I don't know. We all have different beliefs about the afterworld and all of that in some ways. But yeah, I don't know.
It's funny you mentioned butterflies. I know that's a symbol in a lot of pregnancy loss communities. The support group that we attended did a couple of memorial events. At Christmas time, we had a candle lighting where you could go up to the front of the room and there would be candles. You would take a candle and light it and put it in the wreath and say your child's name and anything else you wanted to say. At the end of the evening, there would just be this table full of candles. It was just beautiful. It was always very well done. But in the summertime, they would have a picnic where you could bring any other children you had, anybody who wanted to come, and they would have a butterfly release, and you would purchase a butterfly in advance. And then we would all at the same time stand, in a big circle or wherever we were and open up these boxes, and these butterflies would start to emerge. It was beautiful. By then we had some very good friends that we had made through the group, and we would make an afternoon of it. We would bring picnic lunch and sit and talk and have a good time. One thing people don't realize too is that, especially when you go to a support group like this, I know people who came for the first time would be surprised because, yes, there were a lot of tears shed. We always had a box of Kleenex on the table. But there was a lot of laughter too, and a lot of very black humor, very dark humor. But, we had a lot of fun too. And, you find people that you can be yourself with, at least in that respect. I was one of the very few people who did not wind up with a child. And sometimes I'd be sitting with a group of these women, and they were all just lovely women. And of course, we had so much in common. But, they'd all be talking about their other children. and I would be sitting there with nothing to offer. But still, they got me they understood me in some respects that other people would not. So you kind of take what you can get sometimes.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to mention that as well. I don't know, because I'm a foreigner here in Spain, but I wasn't offered the support group, after my pregnancy losses. I don't know if Sarah and Michael did have those options as well. But that point that you just raised as to some of the ladies in my communities who have spoke about going to those groups have felt like they've not fitted properly because people are either trying to have another child or are trying to have children already. So it's kind of like feeling like they don't belong there. And something when you were saying as well about the candle ceremony, I know that those who haven't had a loss feel like sometimes they can't belong in there as well. So do we all come along, I guess, feeling like we miss a part of the story in some way? I don't know, it's then. So maybe irrespective of all of our stories, we feel like I have to keep this piece quiet or I'm not allowed to step into that piece and things. So whereas, I don't know, I said at the beginning, I really believe that then, if we classify ourselves as childless, all of our stories count. It doesn't matter how we arrived here. All of our stories count. So, yeah.
Sure.
I know that we used to go to meetings with the other support group facilitators from different areas across the province, and we would talk. And I said to somebody once that, sometimes I feel like maybe we shouldn't be facilitating because, everybody wants hope. Everybody wants that rainbow baby. And we don't have that, and we're not going to have that. And, maybe we shouldn't be in this position. And this woman who was one of the managers of the organization, she said, no, she said, it's very important that you're there because people see that you are still standing.
Yep.
You are still there. And life's thrown a lot at you, but you're still hanging in there, and that you can go through this. And even if you don't have a child, you can come out okay. And so that made me feel better. Eventually, there were a lot of reasons why we stopped facilitating. 10 years is a long time. You hear a lot of very, very sad stories, and it does wear you down after a while. I think people who work in helping professions find that sometimes. But a little part of it, I will admit, was, the fact that we saw all these people going through the group. And obviously we don't know what happened to all of them because some of them would just come for one meeting and that we'd never see them again. Whether they decided the group was not for them or they got what they needed from that one meeting. But so we didn't know what happened to a lot of people. But the people that I do know, a lot of their stories, I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of couples that I know who did not go on to have a living child. And I'm pretty sure that most of them have never had one since I lost touch with them. But yeah, so you do sort of feel like, in the minority.
Speaking about feeling in the minority, I kind of wanted to come back to Michael as well and just say, I really appreciate hearing your voice on this. I know how probably difficult it was for my husband, she is up there, what do I do, and it's that helpless feeling that the man, can't do anything in those particular moments. And I don't know, the way you spoke about this whole experience just really, really touched me, and I'm really grateful to hear your voice. I know those words that you said back at the beginning as well, of how you resonated with the difficult choice that my husband made to have a vasectomy. I really appreciated your words on that. Thank you.
No, I will second that.
Thank you. I've really loved spending time with you both, and Sarah, of course. But are you going to Chester this year, Sandra?
Not sure. Don't know.
Okay.
You're not going back? You're going back or no?
Yeah, we're going. Yeah.
You're going in the end?
Yeah, because I owe you a lunch.
Okay, so then I'm obliged to go.
I've really, really enjoyed this chat.
It's been a really important one. So, thank you for making space.
Yes, thank you for making space for this topic. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time that's something that I haven't seen addressed very often in the community, and I thought it was important.
And just preparing for it, I think it is just healing another layer. It's just stripping, little by little. So, I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you both for coming on and being so open and honest. I think the conversation went in a different way than, it always does, but I'm really struck by the piece around the silence and how this has been an opportunity for us all to share our stories. So thank you for your honesty. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you both on, genuinely.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Full Stop podcast. We hope you found this space with us helpful, useful, and inspirational. We know that it was an emotional episode. As always, you can head to thefullstoppod.com to sign up for our newsletter, check out the show notes, all our resources, and to join the online community to carry on the conversation. As always, please remember, you are not alone.